He thought he was trading a plain housewife for a genetically superior goddess, but he did not realize they were both wearing masks bought with my life savings of $200,000. When their perfect baby was born, the truth did not just come out. It screamed from the delivery room. Now, the man who left me with $0 is begging for a seat at my table. My name is Eleanor Vance. For 6 hours, I had been a ghost haunting my own kitchen, moving with a precision that felt more like a religious ritual than a celebration. I moved through the motions of zesting, whisking, and folding, ensuring that every grain of sugar was accounted for. The scent of Meyer lemons eventually filled every corner of our suburban Seattle home, a sharp and bright aroma that should have signaled joy. This was for our 10th anniversary. I had baked a lemon cream cake from scratch, a tradition we had kept since our first year of marriage when we were broke and living in a tiny studio with a leaking ceiling. Back then, the cake was a symbol of everything we would build. Now, as I smoothed the final layer of pale frosting, it felt like I was trying to patch a shattered glass heart with nothing but sugar and hope. Julian Thorne was late. He was not just a few minutes behind schedule, but absent in a way that felt heavy and intentional. As a high-powered sales director at the Vanguard Realty Group, his schedule was often a monster he had to wrestle, but he had never once missed this specific day in an entire decade. I looked at the dining table I had spent all afternoon perfecting. I had pulled out our finest china and lit expensive beeswax candles that were now halfway to their deaths, weeping slow tracks of wax onto the white lace tablecloth. I touched the rim of his empty crystal glass and whispered to the stagnant air of the room, "Where are you, Julian? Please just be on your way home." The silence of the house was aggressive. It allowed my mind to drift toward the dark corners I had spent months trying to ignore. I remembered the way he had started tilting his phone screen away from me, the blue light glowing like a guilty secret in the middle of the night. I remembered the sharp, cloying scent of a perfume that was definitely not mine. Something aggressive and expensive clinging to his silk ties when he came home after midnight. He had become a stranger who happened to share my bed, a man whose cold indifference made me feel like an outdated piece of furniture he was just waiting to haul to the curb. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10 o'clock at night. The sound vibrated through my bones, mocking me. I picked up my phone for the 100th time, my fingers trembling so hard I nearly dropped it. Just as I was about to dial his office, a notification flashed. It was a text message from Julian, 4 words that felt like a physical blow to my chest. "Don't wait. Go sleep." I stared at those words until the light of the screen burned into my retinas. My breath hitched, caught in a throat that felt like it was closing up. 10 years. 10 years of my life. "And this is all I get," I muttered, my voice cracking in the empty room. No explanation. No "I love you." Nothing at all. A cold, sickening knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Julian had never forgotten our anniversary, not even when he was a struggling intern. I stood up, my legs feeling like they were made of lead, and walked toward our master bedroom. I needed to see his things. I needed some kind of tangible proof that he still existed in my world. I opened the walk-in closet, and the air was sucked out of my lungs. The space where his limited edition leather suitcase usually sat was a gaping hole. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped animal. I began throwing hangers aside, my movements becoming frantic and messy. His tailored suits were gone. His designer shoes were gone. Even the velvet-lined drawer for his luxury watches was nothing but a hollowed-out void. No, 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 no. I gasped, clutching the edge of the mahogany dresser to keep from collapsing onto the floor. "Julian, how could you just leave? Like this?" The realization crashed over me with the weight of a tidal wave. He had been planning this for weeks. While I was zesting lemons and dreaming of another 10 years, He had been systematically packing his life into a suitcase I had bought him for his last birthday. He had stripped our home of his presence while I was in the kitchen, blinded by the pathetic hope that a handmade cake could save a dying marriage. I walked back to the dining room. The candles had finally flickered out, leaving only the bitter smell of burnt wicks and the pale, judgmental moonlight filtering through the windows. I sat down at the table, the silence now a physical weight on my shoulders. I did not reach for a fork. I used my bare fingers to tear a piece of the lemon cream cake away. It was cold. It was sour. It tasted like the end of everything I knew. I chewed slowly, the sugar turning to sand in my mouth. I looked at the empty chair across from me and felt the first spark of something that was not just sadness. It was the cold, hard realization that the man I had sacrificed everything for was a ghost I had never truly known. As the shadows of Seattle stretched across the floor, I knew that the Eleanor Vance who had started this day was gone. The woman sitting in the dark was someone I was only beginning to meet. I didn't sleep. I sat in that dark dining room until the gray Seattle morning bled through the curtains, making the remains of my anniversary dinner look like a crime scene. By 8 o'clock in the morning, I was behind the wheel of my car, driving toward the glass towers of downtown Seattle with a cold, hollow feeling in my gut. I walked into the lobby of Vanguard Realty, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I expected to find Julian in his corner office, perhaps looking as haggard as I felt. Instead, I found silence and the heavy weight of pity. The receptionists looked away when I approached. My heart sank as I reached the desk of Brandy. The secretary, who had been Julian's right hand for 5 years, she looked at me, her eyes brimming with a sympathy that felt like a death sentence. Brandy. "Where is he?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "He didn't come home last night." Brandy bit her lip and looked around to ensure nobody was listening. She leaned in, her voice hushed. "Eleanor, he's gone. He turned in his resignation 2 days ago. He said he was relocating to New York immediately." My world tilted. 2 days ago. That's impossible. We had plans. He didn't say a word. Brandy reached out and touched my hand, her expression pained. "There's more. Eleanor, he wasn't alone. Everyone in the office has been talking about it for weeks. He's with Sienna Montgomery. You know, the Montgomery shipping heiress. They were seen boarding a private jet. He called her his fiancée. The name felt like a serrated blade across my throat. Sienna Montgomery, young, blonde, and worth billions. I stumbled back, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone. I opened my banking app, my fingers fumbling with the password. When the screen finally loaded, I felt the air leave my lungs. Our joint savings account, the one we had built together over 10 years, the $200,000 we had saved for a house of our own and a future family, was gone. The balance read 0. A notification pinged at the top of my screen. It was an email from our landlord. I opened it with trembling hands. Julian had moved to terminate our lease effective immediately, and since the security deposit had already been reclaimed by him, I had exactly 14 days to vacate the premises. I don't remember the drive home. I moved on autopilot, fueled by a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated shock. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw a black SUV idling in front of the house. Julian was there. He was coming out of the front door, carrying 2 high-end garment bags and a box of his expensive watches. He looked radiant. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, not a man who had just destroyed a decade of marriage. "Julian," I screamed, throwing my car door open. "Julian, look at me!" He stopped, but he didn't look guilty. He looked annoyed. He waited for me to reach him, his eyes scanning me with a cold, clinical detachment that made me feel small. "You're home early," he said. his voice smooth and devoid of any warmth. "You took everything." I gasped, my chest heaving as I struggled to find my breath. The money. The $200,000. The house. Brandy said you're leaving for New York with that woman, Julian. Please. Tell me this is a nightmare. He let out a short, mocking laugh. He took a step toward me, and for a second, I thought he might apologize. Instead, he leaned down, his face inches from mine. "It's not a nightmare. Eleanor, it's an upgrade. Look at you. You've spent the last 10 years turning into a boring, suburban cliché. Every time I look at you, all I see is a woman who smells like cheap flour and old dreams. You were a means to an end, but I've outgrown you. I gave you everything I yelled, the tears finally breaking free. I worked 3 jobs so you could have the life you wanted. We were a team. We were a starter marriage," he snapped, his voice hardening. "Sienna is a goddess. She has the pedigree, the wealth, and the looks to match my ambition. You're just a footnote." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a thick envelope, tossing it onto the hood of my car. "Those are the divorce papers. I've already signed them. Sign them today, and I'll let you keep whatever furniture you can fit into a U-Haul. I have a flight to Paris at 4 o'clock this afternoon, and I don't want to be tied to a weight like you for a second longer. Julian, you can't just—" I choked on my own sobs, my hand clutching my throat. We were supposed to grow old together. Grow old. He sneered, turning his back on me to toss his bags into the SUV. "I'm just getting started. Don't bother calling. I've already changed my number. Have a nice life. Eleanor, try to wash the smell of the kitchen off your skin before you go looking for your next victim." He climbed into the car and drove away without a single backward glance, leaving me standing in the driveway of a home that was no longer mine, holding the legal death warrant of my marriage. I stood there as the rain began to fall, the cold Seattle mist mixing with my tears, and I realized that the man I loved had never existed at all. The silence Julian left behind was not peaceful. It was a ringing, deafening void. I spent the next hour moving like a zombie through the house, my eyes landing on things that were no longer ours. I eventually found myself in the back of the storage closet, pulling out a dusty plastic bin labeled College Memories. I had not opened it in years. I sat on the cold floor, the divorce papers still sitting on the kitchen counter like a ticking bomb, and lifted the lid. Underneath a pile of old notebooks and theater stubs, I found a leather-bound photo album. I turned the pages, and there he was, Julian Thorne at 20 years old. The man in these photos bore almost no resemblance to the polished, aristocratic real estate mogul who had just sneered at me. The Julian of the past had a heavy, hooked nose that dominated his face and a chin that receded so sharply it made his neck look thick and clumsy. His skin was a map of deep, pitted acne scars from a rough adolescence he never talked about. He looked awkward, fragile, and utterly ordinary. "Oh, Julian, look at you," I whispered, my thumb tracing the jagged line of his old jawline. "You were so desperate to hide this man, and I was the one who helped you bury him." The memories came flooding back, bitter and sharp. I remembered the year I worked 3 different jobs just to make his dream a reality. I spent my mornings waitressing at a greasy diner, my afternoons tutoring ungrateful high school students, and my nights cleaning office buildings until my hands were cracked and bleeding from the bleach. I did not buy new clothes for 3 years. I skipped meals and walked to work to save every cent until I had exactly $40,000 in a dedicated savings account. I had handed him that money like it was a gift from God. I remembered the months of recovery after the surgeons broke his jaw and reconstructed his nose. I was the one who sat by his bedside, blending his food into liquid and feeding it to him through a surgical straw because his mouth was wired shut. I was the one who changed his bandages and told him he was beautiful even when his face was purple and swollen like a bruised fruit. I paid for that nose. I paid for that chin. I said to the empty room, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. Every time he looks in the mirror to admire his so-called genetically superior face, he is looking at $40,000 of my blood, sweat, and tears. The irony was a suffocating weight. He was using the very face I had built for him to seduce a billionaire heiress. He had traded me in because I reminded him of the boy with the hooked nose and the scarred skin. He did not just hate me, he hated the version of himself that I had loved when nobody else would. He was a fraud, a carefully constructed piece of art, and I was the architect he had decided to demolish. I looked at the photos again. In one, he was smiling shyly, his old eyes full of a warmth that had long since frozen over. He had spent a decade trying to erase every trace of his humble beginnings, reinventing himself as a man of pedigree and class. He thought he had burned all the evidence. He thought I was too broken to remember. I did not tear the photos up. I did not burn them in the fireplace as a dramatic gesture of grief. Instead, I carefully tucked the most revealing ones into my purse. They felt heavy, like a loaded gun. Not yet. Julian. I breathed, my voice cold and steady for the first time since the night before. You think you can just walk away with my life and my money. But you forgot one thing. I know exactly what is underneath that expensive mask. I closed the bin and pushed it back into the darkness of the closet. He wanted a war. He had no idea I was already holding the keys to his destruction. For now, I would let him fly to Paris. I would let him enjoy his stolen life. Because the higher he climbed, the harder he would eventually fall when I finally decided to pull the rug out from under his manufactured perfection. The 14-day deadline Julian left me with felt like a countdown to an execution. I packed what I could into a beat-up rental truck and moved into a tiny, 400-square-foot studio apartment in a working-class neighborhood of South Seattle. The air was thick with the scent of damp wool and exhaust fumes, and the walls were so thin I could hear the rhythmic thumping of my neighbor's television. My life had been reduced to 3 suitcases and a few boxes of kitchen supplies. With the last of my meager savings, exactly $1,200, I made a choice. I did not spend it on a lawyer I could not afford, or clothes to hide my shame. Instead, I bought a used industrial-grade oven from a bakery that was closing down. It was a heavy, temperamental beast of a machine that took up half my kitchen, but when I turned it on, the warmth felt like the first honest thing I had touched in weeks. I called my new life the Hearthstone Batch. The first month was a blur of flour and exhaustion. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning to bake, the smell of lemon and vanilla fighting against the mustiness of my apartment. I did not have a car anymore, so I delivered every order on an old bicycle with a rusted rack. I remember one Tuesday afternoon, the Seattle drizzle turning into a relentless downpour. I was soaking wet, my hair plastered to my face, trying to shield a box of delicate pastries with my own body as I pedaled up a steep hill. Please, just stay dry. Please. I whispered to the box, my legs screaming in protest. If this falls, I have nothing left. My luck began to change when a small boutique advertising agency ordered 3 dozen lemon tarts for a client meeting. Word of mouth began to spread like a slow, steady fire. People did not just like the taste, they liked the story of the woman who delivered gourmet sweets on a bicycle in the middle of a storm. That was how I met Nathaniel Cross. He was a prominent architect who had recently lost his wife, a man with silver at his temples and eyes that held a depth of quiet sorrow. I was delivering a tiered cake to his firm for a retirement party when the elevator broke down. I ended up carrying the heavy cake up 6 flights of stairs. When I walked into the lobby, panting and covered in a fine dusting of flour. Nathaniel was the first person to reach for the box. "You look like you have just climbed a mountain." "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice a low, steady rumble that seemed to settle the frantic beating of my heart. "I am fine," I managed to gasp out, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. "The cake is... it is perfect. That is all that matters." Nathaniel did not just take the cake. He stayed and talked to me. He was impressed by the grit behind the sweetness. Over the next few months, he became a regular customer, then a friend, and eventually something more. He used his architectural expertise to help me find and design a small, charming storefront that I could actually afford. He connected me with his high-end clients in the construction and design world, men and women who appreciated craftsmanship over status. By the time 6 months had passed, I was no longer the broken woman Julian had thrown away. I was the owner of a thriving business, my skin glowing from hard work and my confidence rebuilt on a foundation of my own making. I had moved into a proper apartment, and for the first time in a decade, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. But as my life stabilized, my mind turned back to the ghosts of my past. I started spending my late nights on my laptop, digging into the shiny, curated world of Sienna Montgomery. On the surface, she was a flawless heiress, but I knew better than anyone that a beautiful face could be bought. I began looking for the cracks in her digital armor, searching for the truth that lay beneath the filters and the lies. I was not just looking for revenge. I was looking for the reality that Julian was so desperate to escape. "I see you, Sienna," I murmured as I zoomed in on a high-resolution photo of her at a gala in Paris. "I see the parts of you that do not quite fit the story." I noticed a tiny crescent-shaped mole behind her ear, half hidden by a diamond earring. It was a small detail, but it was a thread, and I was going to pull it until the entire tapestry of their perfect life unraveled. The blue light of my laptop screen was the only thing illuminating my small apartment at 2 o'clock in the morning. I had become an expert at navigating the polished, filtered layers of Julian and Sienna's new life in New York. Their wedding photos from the ceremony in Paris had finally been posted to a high society blog. They looked like royalty, standing on a private terrace overlooking the Seine, Julian in a custom tuxedo and Sienna in a lace gown that probably cost more than my first house. I zoomed in on a high-resolution shot of them dancing. Sienna was laughing, her head tilted back, exposing the skin behind her left ear. I froze, my hand hovering over the trackpad. There it was, partially hidden by a 5-carat diamond stud, a tiny, distinct, crescent-shaped mole. My blood ran cold as a memory from 15 years ago surfaced. I was sitting in a high school cafeteria, watching a girl named Megan, nicknamed Mousie by the cruelest kids, eat her lunch alone. Megan had been a girl with a severe overbite, a shapeless nose, and that exact same mole. We hadn't been friends, but I had defended her once from a bully. She had looked at me with those sad, hollow eyes and whispered a thank you that I never forgot. "Megan." "Is it really you?" I whispered to the empty room, my heart racing against my ribs. Could you really be the same person I spent the next 3 hours digging through the dark underbelly of public records and digital archives? I searched for legal name changes in the state of Connecticut, where Megan had grown up. My eyes burned from the screen glare, but I could not stop. I finally found it tucked away in a dusty county clerk's database. 3 years ago, Megan Walters had legally become Sienna Montgomery. Then, I found the paper trail that Julian had been too blinded by vanity and greed to see. There were no trust funds. There were no shipping empires. Instead, I found a mountain of unpaid medical bills from elite plastic surgery clinics in Beverly Hills and Miami. She had spent over $300,000 to buy a new face, and every penny of it was borrowed money. She was a ghost of a girl who had built a mansion out of credit cards and lies. She was not an heiress, She was a desperate woman running from a life of debt and mediocrity. "Oh, Julian, you idiot!" I laughed, a sharp, jagged sound in the quiet of my apartment. "You thought you were marrying a golden ticket, but you just married a mirror image of yourself." It was a masterpiece of deception. Julian had abandoned a decade of loyalty for a woman he thought would grant him entry into the billionaire class. Meanwhile, Sienna or Megan had targeted a rising star in real estate, thinking his success was her way out of a financial hole. They were two predators who had accidentally caught each other in their own traps, both wearing masks paid for with money they did not have. Julian had used my $200,000 of life savings to polish his own image, and she had used predatory loans to build hers. I leaned back in my chair, staring at their smiling faces on the screen. They were so proud of their perfection. Neither of them knew that the person standing next to them was a hollow shell held together by silicone, fillers, and deep-seated insecurity. Julian thought he was upgrading his legacy, trading my plain, honest features for what he called a genetically superior goddess. He believed he was finally purging the average from his bloodline. "You have no idea," I muttered, a cold smile spreading across my face as I watched the cursor blink. "You have absolutely no idea what is coming for you." The ultimate irony hit me then, making me laugh until my chest ached. They were planning to have a child. I had seen the social media posts where they talked about starting a perfect dynasty. But surgery does not reach the bone marrow. It does not rewrite the genetic code. When that baby finally arrives, it will not have the straight nose Julian bought or the delicate jawline Megan designed. It will have the hooked nose and the recessed chin of the two people who were too ashamed to exist. The truth was not just hidden in my storage bin anymore. It was written in their very blood, waiting for the moment of birth to scream its way into the light. I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I did not need to expose them yet. Nature was already preparing the ultimate revelation. The Hearthstone batch had become more than just a bakery. It was a sanctuary. By the time my business hit its 1-year anniversary, we were the talk of Seattle. Lines stretched around the block by 7 o'clock in the morning, and my lemon cream cakes were being featured in glossy lifestyle magazines. But success brought out the vultures. Julian, who had once looked at me with such disgust, was now watching my rise from the shadows of his failing reputation in New York. I heard through the grapevine that his big move hadn't been the triumph he expected. The harassment started small. 2 men claiming to be health inspectors showed up at 3 o'clock on a busy Friday afternoon. They were aggressive and loud, demanding to see permits that were clearly displayed on the wall. They tried to claim they found evidence of a pest infestation in my pristine kitchen. I knew immediately who had sent them. Julian's signature pettiness was all over their rehearsed lines. Nathaniel saw it happening. He had been spending more time at the shop, often sitting in the corner with his laptop, working on blueprints but keeping a sharp eye on the door. He was a quiet, steady presence that made me feel safe for the first time in years. "Eleanor, you need to be careful," Nathaniel said one evening as we were closing up. "Julian is a cornered animal. He is losing his grip, and he is looking for someone to blame. Let me stay here during the rush hours." Just to be sure, I didn't argue. I felt the storm coming. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The bell above the door chimed, and a hush fell over the customers. Sienna Montgomery walked in, looking like she had stepped off a runway in Paris. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that clung to her frame, purposefully highlighting a very prominent baby bump. She looked flawless, but up close. I could see the tension in the corners of her mouth and the way her eyes darted around the room, looking for something to destroy. "So, this is the little hobby Julian told me about." Sienna sneered, her voice loud enough for every customer to hear. She walked to the counter and picked up a delicate macaron, crushing it between her manicured fingers. "It smells like desperation and cheap yeast in here. Honestly, Eleanor, Don't you have any dignity left? I didn't flinch. I wiped the counter with a cloth and looked her straight in the eyes. The door is behind you. Sienna. I don't serve people who have no taste. Sienna laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. She leaned over the counter, her belly pressing against the wood. Julian told me you were pathetic, but I didn't realize you were this delusional. We are moving back to Seattle, and frankly, your little shop is an eyesore. It makes our neighborhood look like a slum. You should just close up and disappear before Julian has to exert any real effort to get rid of you. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a cold, lethal whisper. Does Julian know that his genetically superior goddess is actually a girl from Connecticut named Megan? Does he know about the $300,000 in debt you are hiding behind those designer clothes? Megan Sienna's face didn't just pale, it grayed. The mask of the heiress shattered in an instant, revealing a terrified, cornered girl. Her breath hitched, and her hands began to shake. How do you... She stammered, her voice trembling. You stay away from my life. You are nothing. You are a failure. In a flash of pure, unhinged rage, Sienna lunged across the counter. Her hand came swinging toward my face. The slap echoed through the shop, a sharp crack that silenced the entire room. My head snapped to the side, and I felt the sting of her rings cutting into my cheek. Before she could strike again, a hand shot out from behind me. Nathaniel had moved with a speed I didn't know he possessed. He caught Sienna's wrist in mid-air and twisted it back, pinning her arm behind her with a firm, clinical precision. Don't you dare touch her, Nathaniel growled, his voice vibrating with a protective fury I had never heard before. Let go! Let me go! Sienna screamed, her face contorted in pain and panic. You are hurting me. Help, someone help me. Nathaniel didn't let go until I placed a hand on his shoulder. He released her, and she stumbled back against the display case, clutching her arm and gasping for air. Get out, I said, my voice steady despite the throb in my cheek. I pointed to the security camera mounted directly above the register. We have everything on digital record. The verbal harassment, the physical assault, all of it. If you or Julian so much as breathe in my direction again, this video goes to the police and every social media outlet in the city. I wonder what the Montgomery family would think of their namesake being a violent fraud. Sienna looked at me with pure, distilled hatred, but the fear was stronger. She turned and fled the shop, nearly tripping over her own heels as she ran toward her waiting car. Nathaniel turned to me, his eyes full of concern. He reached out, his thumb gently brushing the red mark on my face. I am so sorry, Eleanor. I should have stopped her sooner. No, I said, a cold sense of triumph blooming in my chest. She gave me exactly what I needed. The aftermath of the bakery incident was a slow burn that I watched from the safety of my new life. I had not released the video yet because a threat is often more powerful than the act itself. It was a noose around their necks, tightening every time they thought about their reputation. I spent my evenings watching the cracks form in their digital empire. On Instagram, they were still the golden couple, posting photos of gold-flecked lattes and nursery furniture that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. But behind the filters, the foundation was rotting. I heard the echoes of their collapse through Brandy, who still had friends in the New York real estate circles. Julian had finally started digging into the Montgomery trust funds he thought he had married into. Instead of millions, he found a trail of collection notices and high-interest loans. He found out that the woman he thought was a goddess was actually carrying $300,000 of debt from elite surgical centers. One night, a mutual friend leaked a recording of a fight they had in their Manhattan penthouse. Julian's voice was unrecognizable, stripped of its usual polished arrogance. Where is the money? Sienna? The trust. Why am I getting calls from a debt collector in Miami about a nose job from 3 years ago? Julian's voice was a jagged edge of panic. Sienna's response was a shrill, desperate scream. You told me you were a top director. You said you had millions. Why was my card declined at the jewelry store? Why did you have to use a credit card to pay the rent this month? I gave you everything. I gave you $200,000 of my own savings, Julian yelled back, his voice cracking. I left a stable life for you. And you are just a lying ghost. They were two people who had fallen in love with a mirror, only to realize the glass was shattered. Yet they couldn't stop. They were too deep in the lie. They continued to post. Julian shared a video of a 4D ultrasound of their unborn daughter, but he had intentionally blurred the baby's face, claiming it was to protect her privacy from the public eye. I sat in my office at the bakery, pausing the video at the 42-second mark. Even through the intentional blur and the grainy resolution of the medical scan, I saw it. The profile was unmistakable to someone who had spent a decade looking at the original blueprints. The baby had the same heavy, hooked nose that I had paid $40,000 to remove from Julian's face. She had the same sharply receding chin that had once made Julian cry with shame in our college dorm room. The genetic debt was coming due. No amount of money, no celebrity surgeon, and no luxury lifestyle could stop the truth from manifesting in bone and tissue. You can't blur out the truth forever. Julian, I whispered, touching the cold glass of my monitor. She looks just like the man you tried so hard to kill. I knew that the birth of this child would be the final blow. Julian had abandoned me because he wanted a superior legacy. He wanted a child who looked like a movie star. Instead, he was about to be handed a mirror of his own insecurities. He was going to look at that baby every single day and see the person he hated most in the world himself. I spent the next few days preparing a gift. It was a beautiful, hand-carved wooden box. Inside, I placed a high-quality leather album. It contained every photo I had of the real Julian Thorne and the public records I had found of Megan Walters. I added the receipts for the surgeries I had funded and the medical history of the man he used to be. I didn't send it to their home. I waited. I kept my ear to the ground, waiting for the news that Sienna had gone into labor. Nathaniel walked into the kitchen as I was tying a silk ribbon around the box. He didn't ask what was inside. He simply put his hand on my shoulder, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of my memories. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? He asked softly. I am not doing anything but returning what belongs to them, I replied, my voice calm and devoid of malice. They built a life on a foundation of sand. I am just providing the wind. I was not the same woman who had sat in the dark eating a cold lemon cake. I was the architect of my own peace now, and as the news broke that Sienna had been rushed to the hospital in the middle of a winter storm, I knew the curtain was finally about to rise on the final act of their tragedy. The storm outside the hospital windows was a violent symphony of wind and rain, mirroring the chaos Julian must have felt. I was miles away in my quiet bedroom, but I could almost taste the sterile air of the maternity ward. Julian had been waiting in that hallway for over 12 hours, pacing back and forth, fueled by the desperate hope that this child would be his ultimate redemption. He needed a perfect daughter to show the world that his life was a masterpiece. He wanted a living trophy to prove that he had finally left his mediocre past behind. In the delivery room, the reality of biology was about to collide with a decade of expensive lies. When the doctor finally stepped into the waiting area, cradling a bundle wrapped in a pink blanket, Julian rushed forward. He expected to see a miniature version of the goddess he thought he had married. He expected a button nose and a sculpted jawline. Instead, he was met with the ghost of the boy I had loved in college. The infant did not have Sienna's delicate, surgically narrowed nose. She had a prominent, hooked bridge that was the exact replica of Julian's original face. Her chin did not have the strong, defined bone structure Julian had paid $40,000 for. It receded sharply into her neck, mirroring the same weak profile Megan had once hidden behind thick scarves. The baby was the perfect, undeniable combination of the two people they had tried so hard to erase. Julian stared at the child, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. He didn't reach out to take her. He stepped back as if the infant were a ticking bomb. "No, this is not possible," Julian whispered, his voice trembling so hard it was barely audible. "Look at her. Look at that nose. That is not my daughter. My wife is a Montgomery. We are beautiful people. This has to be a mistake." The nurse looked at him with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Mr. Thorne, there is no mistake. This is your daughter. She was born at exactly 1 o'clock in the morning. You swapped her," Julian suddenly roared, his eyes bulging as the panic took over. "You brought me the wrong baby. Look at us. We are perfect. How could two people like us produce something that looks like this? I want a DNA test. Right now, I want a private investigator, and I want every nurse in this wing questioned." The doctor stepped in, trying to calm him down, but the damage was done. Julian was convinced that nature had cheated him. He couldn't accept that the baby was the only honest thing in his life. Inside the recovery room, Sienna was in a state of total collapse. When they had first handed her the baby, she had looked at those familiar, unwanted features and screamed. She saw the girl named Megan looking back at her through that tiny, hooked nose. She refused to touch her. She refused to even look in the direction of the bassinet. She simply turned toward the wall and fell into a cold, catatonic silence. She knew the truth, even if Julian was too blinded by his own ego to see it yet. At exactly 2 o'clock in the morning, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I saw the New York area code and knew exactly who it was. I sat up, leaning against the headboard, and answered with a calm, steady voice. "Hello, Julian." The sound of his breathing on the other end was ragged and wet. He sounded like a man who was drowning. "Eleanor, I don't know what to do. She did it. She ruined everything. The baby, Eleanor, the baby she is hideous. She has this hooked nose and no chin at all. Sienna must have found some ugly, bottom-feeding man to sleep with just to spite me. I am looking at this child and I don't see myself at all. I see a stranger." I closed my eyes, feeling a strange mixture of pity and triumph. "Are you sure about that, Julian?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you sure you don't see yourself? I have a perfect face." "Eleanor." You know that he screamed into the phone. "I am a thorn. My daughter was supposed to be a goddess, not a reminder of everything I hate." I sat on the edge of my bed, my voice dropping to a level of calm that felt like ice. "Julian, stop. Just stop for a second and listen to me. You are so busy looking for someone to blame that you have forgotten to look at yourself. You want to know why that baby looks the way she does. It is not because of a betrayal. It is because of the truth. Check your email. Julian, I just sent you a file titled Genetic Receipts. Open it. Now." I heard the faint chime of a notification on his end. I waited, counting the beats of my own heart as he opened the attachment. The file was a side-by-side comparison of the two people who thought they were gods. On one side was a photo of Julian at 20 years old, with his hooked nose and his receding chin. On the other side was a photo of Megan Walters with her identical features. I had even included the scanned medical receipts for the $40,000 I had paid for Julian's reconstruction and the $300,000 of debt Megan had incurred to build her own mask. Who is this girl?" Julian whispered, his voice small and hollow. "Who is Megan? That is your wife. Julian, I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. She is a girl from Connecticut who was just as ashamed of her face as you were of yours. You can pay a surgeon to reshape your skin, but you cannot pay anyone to rewrite your genetic code. That baby is not a mistake. She is the most honest thing either of you has ever produced. I heard a sharp, strangled gasp from his end. I could imagine him looking at the screen, then looking through the glass of the nursery at the infant who carried the truth of his origins in her very bones. He was seeing the hooked nose of his youth and the receding chin of the girl he had married for her pedigree. No, 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 he began to moan, the sound escalating into a full-blown scream of agony. I left you. I stole your money. I threw away 10 years for a lie. She's a fraud. She's just like me. We are both. We are both monsters. You traded a woman who loved your real face for a woman who was wearing a mask bought with my life savings, I said, my voice cold and final. You thought you were upgrading, Julian, but you were just buying into a pyramid scheme of vanity. You wanted a genetically superior goddess, but nature gave you exactly what you deserved, a mirror. Julian began to wail, a primal, pathetic sound that echoed through the phone. He was screaming about the money, about his career, about the fact that he would have to look at his own insecurities every time he changed a diaper. He was a man standing in the middle of a burning house that he had built with his own hands. Eleanor, please, I didn't know. I made a mistake. Please, help me, he begged, his voice cracking with desperation. Goodbye, Julian, I said, feeling the last thread of connection to him snap. I hope the view from your perfect life is everything you dreamed of. I pressed the end call button and set the phone face down on the nightstand. I walked over to my window and looked out at the Seattle skyline, the rain finally beginning to let up. I didn't feel happy, but I felt a profound sense of weightlessness. The truth had finally screamed its way into the world, and I didn't have to carry it anymore. Julian was alone now, trapped in a room with a baby who looked just like the man he was too cowardly to be. The legal battle that followed the birth of the child was a spectacle of human desperation. Julian and Sienna did not just separate, they tore each other apart in a Manhattan courtroom. Julian filed for divorce citing fraud, claiming he was misled about her identity and financial status. Sienna fired back with a countersuit, accusing Julian of being a penniless liar who had used her to escape his own debts. The air in that courtroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and cheap lies. You are a thief. Megan Julian screamed during one hearing, his voice cracking with a high-pitched, hysterical edge. You stole a name. You stole a life. And you saddled me with that child. Sienna, who was now being referred to in all legal documents by her real name, Megan Walters, lunged toward him. You used me. You promised me a shipping empire. You are nothing but a failed real estate agent in a rented suit. The real Montgomery family eventually caught wind of the scandal. They did not take the defamation of their name lightly. They filed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against Megan for identity theft and fraud, effectively stripping her of every remaining cent and any hope of a future in high society. Julian's career at Vanguard Realty was already dead. His reputation was so toxic that no firm in New York or Seattle would touch him. He was forced to declare bankruptcy. His assets were seized, and he ended up moving into the damp basement of his parents' house, the very place he had spent 15 years trying to forget. Megan did not stay to face the music. One rainy Tuesday morning, she simply vanished, leaving the infant behind in the hospital. She had fled to avoid the process servers, leaving no forwarding address. Julian, however, was even more cold-hearted. He refused to take custody of the baby. I can't do it. Eleanor," he sobbed when he called me one last time, begging for money I would never give him. "Every time I look at her, I see my old nose. I see that chin. I see the man I worked so hard to kill. She is a constant reminder of my failure. I just can't look at her." The child, whom the nurses had named Bella, was placed into the foster care system. My heart ached for her, but I knew I could not be her mother. I was finally free of the Thorne family shadow. Instead, I did the only thing that felt right. I set up an anonymous educational trust and began funneling a significant portion of the profits from my bakery into a local children's advocacy organization. I made sure that Bella would always have the best medical care, the best schools, and a safety net that had nothing to do with her appearance. I wanted her to grow up knowing that her value was not written on her face, but in her heart. A few months later, the sun was shining over the Puget Sound as I stood in the middle of the Hearthstone batch. The shop was closed for a private event, my wedding. It was a simple ceremony, attended only by the people who had stood by me when I was at my lowest. There were no designer labels or private jets, just the smell of fresh lemon cake and the sound of genuine laughter. Nathaniel stood before me, his eyes full of a warmth that no amount of money could ever buy. As we exchanged rings, I didn't feel the sharp, bitter sting of revenge. I didn't feel joy because Julian was suffering in a basement or because Megan was a fugitive. I simply felt peace. The truth had been a heavy burden for 10 years, but it had finally set me as free as the morning breeze. "To a life built on things that actually last," Nathaniel whispered as he slid the gold band onto my finger. "To the truth," I replied, my voice steady and clear, no matter how much it costs. As the guests began to eat, Nathaniel stepped behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. We stood by the large front window, watching the people of Seattle walk by. The sun hit the glass, bathing us in a golden light that felt like a blessing. I leaned my head back against his shoulder, closing my eyes. I was Eleanor Vance, a baker, a wife, and a woman who no longer had to hide behind anyone else's mask. My life was finally my own, and it was more beautiful than any filtered photo could ever be. Thank you for listening to this story. Please let me know in the comments where you are listening from so we can connect and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to the Mia Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and support us by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.